They came for blood, not money. A mother and her little girl, tied beneath the freezing pines, praying someone would hear their cries. Miles away, a Navy SEAL and his K-9 partner were training in silence, until the wind carried a scream that would change everything. What followed was not just a rescue. It was a war between good and evil, where bullets met prayers and courage became divine. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. The winter forest of Montana lay buried under silence, the kind that made every heartbeat feel loud. Wind swept through the pines, bending their frozen spines until they shuddered. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a scream broke that silence, raw, sudden, and filled with the kind of fear that made even the crows scatter from their perches. Ethan Walker heard it. He was running the ridge above the valley, boots sinking into the crust of snow, breath a rhythm of steam, and memory? He hadn't come to Montana to find trouble. Trouble had a way of finding him. After years serving as a Navy SEAL, his body healed faster than his mind. The war had ended for the world, but not for him. In his head, the noise never really stopped, only changed its shape. Sometimes it was the sound of a door slamming, sometimes the silence before a gunshot. But today, it was that scream. Rex stiffened before Ethan did. The dog froze mid-step, head lifted, ears pricked. His low growl rumbled through the cold air like thunder in miniature. Ethan dropped to a crouch, scanning the valley below through the trees. The sound came again, a sharp, panicked cry, followed by a voice too small and broken to belong to an adult. A child. Then a man's voice, rough and angry, the kind that carried the arrogance of violence. Ethan's pulse steadied. The part of him that used to follow orders clicked back into place without effort. He touched Rex's shoulder. A silent command. The dog moved forward with practiced precision, staying low, breath white against the air. They slipped between the trees, following the echoes of fear down toward a clearing. Snow muffled their approach, turning each movement into a whisper. When Ethan reached the edge of the clearing, he saw them. A man stood with his back to a half-dead pine, thick rope coiled in his hands. In front of him, tied to the trunk, was a woman, late 20s maybe, her wrists raw from struggling, her face streaked with frozen tears. Next to her, a girl no older than 10, bound and gagged, trembling so violently her shoulders shook with every breath. The man muttered something, voice dripping with contempt, and raised a knife toward the child's chin. Ethan's vision narrowed. There was no thought, only clarity. The quiet space where instinct and training met. His fingers brushed the grip of his pistol, then stopped. The wind was his ally. The angle was clean, 1 heartbeat, 2. He stepped out from behind the tree. "Let her go," he said. The man spun, eyes wide for only a second before they hardened into defiance. "Who the hell—" He never finished. Rex lunged first. The dog hit him mid-chest, a blur of muscle and fury. Snow exploded as they went down. The man screamed, but Ethan was already moving. He closed the distance, grabbed the knife hand, twisted hard. Bone cracked, metal fell. The fight ended before it truly began. When the man tried to crawl away, Ethan kicked the weapon aside and slammed him, face first, into the snow. The forest was still again, except for the muffled sobbing of the girl. Ethan knelt, cutting the ropes around her wrists. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though he knew words like that rarely meant much after Tara had already taken root. The girl pressed against her mother, clinging to her coat, breathing in short, shaking gasps. The woman looked at Ethan for the first time. Gratitude flickered in her eyes, but something else hid behind it, the hollow stare of someone who had seen too much, endured too much. "He said they'd come for us," she whispered. "He said if I didn't tell them where it was, they'd—" Her voice broke. Ethan helped her to her feet. "Who's they?" She swallowed, glancing at the unconscious man in the snow. "Cartel. My husband. He used to work for the Port Authority in Seattle. He found something, a file, photos. I don't know what exactly. They killed him for it. I thought it was over, but—" She looked toward her daughter. "They want it back." Ethan's jaw tightened. It was the same story told in 100 variations. Greed wearing different faces. "You have a car?" "It's gone. They burned it." He glanced around, scanning the tree line. The tracks that led here were fresh, but the wind was picking up. They wouldn't stay that way for long. "You can't stay here," he said. "There's a cabin 2 miles north. Mine. You'll be safe there for now." The woman hesitated. "Why are you helping us?" Ethan didn't answer at first. His gaze drifted toward Rex, who was standing guard over the unconscious man, breath steady, eyes locked forward, the perfect soldier. He had seen the same question in those eyes once before, years ago, on a different battlefield beside a different dog. He'd buried that one himself. Maybe this was how he answered. "Because no one else will," he said finally. They moved through the forest under the growing dusk, snow crunching beneath their boots. The woman's name, she told him, was Rachel Moore, and her daughter was Emma. Neither spoke much after that. Words felt too fragile to survive the cold. Ethan led the way, his mind dividing every step into caution and memory. Behind him, Rachel half-carried Emma, who stumbled but refused to let go of her mother's hand. Rex stayed between them and the path they came from, always watching, always listening. When they reached the cabin, night had swallowed the forest whole. Ethan lit a lantern, casting soft gold across the wooden walls. The place smelled of pine resin and smoke, the way all safe places do. He guided Rachel and Emma inside, closing the door firmly behind them. For a moment, silence returned. But it wasn't the silence of the forest anymore. It was the kind that comes after chaos, the breath before grief finds its shape. Rachel sat by the fire, Emma curled beside her. Rex lay near the door, eyes half closed, but alert. Ethan poured hot water into a tin cup, offering it to Rachel. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "In the morning, we'll figure out what they're after." Rachel's hand shook as she took the cup. "It's a camera," she murmured. "My husband hid it before they killed him. I don't know where, but they think I do." Ethan nodded slowly, staring into the flames. He'd seen that same look in countless faces, people whose worlds had burned and still expected the fire to return. He didn't promise her it wouldn't. He never made promises anymore. Outside, the wind howled like something wounded, and Rex raised his head, listening. In that lonely cabin in Montana, 3 souls found themselves gathered not by chance, but by the echo of the same truth, that sometimes fate doesn't choose heroes. It just sends the ones still standing. The blizzard had thinned by morning, leaving the forest pale and breathless. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, painting the walls in amber and shadow. Ethan hadn't slept. He never did on nights like that. Not after the violence, not after the adrenaline drained away and left the silence heavy. He sat by the window, watching frost bloom across the glass, while Rex lay near the door, eyes half open, still guarding. The world outside was calm again, yet he knew calm was a lie. Calm was what came before the next sound of breaking glass. Rachel stirred near the fire, her daughter still asleep against her shoulder. Her eyes were hollowed by exhaustion, but there was something in her gaze now, a fragile steadiness born from survival. She looked at Ethan as if trying to read the man behind the calm. "You didn't ask what I meant last night," she said quietly, "about the camera." Ethan turned from the window, the faintest flicker of curiosity breaking through the soldier's restraint. She hesitated, staring into the flames. "It wasn't just photos. My husband was documenting the shipments coming through the Seattle port. He thought he'd found patterns, routes that didn't match official logs. He took pictures, made backups, and then he vanished. 2 days later, they found his car at the dock, empty." Ethan said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound useless. He'd seen the same look on widows during deployments, people clinging to fragments, to proof that love had existed before the world turned cruel. Rachel rubbed her hands together as if warming them could erase the memory. "I think he hid the camera somewhere out there, somewhere they can't reach." Rex's ears twitched. He lifted his head and padded closer to Emma, who had begun to whimper softly in her sleep. The sound made Rachel tense, but Ethan shook his head gently. "Let him," he said. Rex nuzzled closer to the girl, resting his chin near her arm, releasing a low, steady breath, almost a hum. The child's trembling slowed, then stopped. Rachel watched in silence, a single tear catching light before she wiped it away. "She's been like that every night since he died," Rachel whispered. Ethan looked at the sleeping girl and at Rex. "He understands," he said. "More than you think?" She frowned. "How can a dog understand loss?" Ethan's eyes lingered on Rex. "Because he's lived it." For a moment, the storm outside was forgotten. Ethan leaned back in his chair, voice lowering as he spoke, not like a soldier giving orders, but like someone unearthing an old wound. "Rex was trained under a handler named Daniels, best man I ever knew. He used to say Rex wasn't just muscle, he was heart. On a mission in Kandahar, we were clearing a compound. Daniels went in first. Rex caught the scent of explosives. He tried to stop him, but it was too late. Ethan's hands tightened unconsciously. Daniels didn't make it out. Rex did. He clawed his way out of the rubble and stood over his handler until we found them. He never moved from that spot." Rachel's eyes softened. "And you took him after?" Ethan nodded once. "The others thought he wouldn't work again, said he'd lost his nerve. But loss doesn't break everyone the same way. Some of us just carry it forward." He looked toward Rex again, who now slept peacefully beside the child. That's why he stays close to her. She reminds him of something pure. The fire cracked, punctuating the silence that followed. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window like quiet ghosts. Rachel leaned back, the story settling into her like a weight she didn't quite understand. "You talk about him like he's a person," she said finally. "He's more human than most people I've met," Ethan replied. The sound of boots crunching in the snow broke the calm. Both Ethan and Rex stiffened. The dog's head snapped up, a low growl humming in his throat. Ethan moved to the window. No figures in sight, but the prints were there, half fresh, half buried. Whoever it was had come close, then turned away. He felt the familiar burn of awareness crawl down his spine. Someone had found their trail. Rachel saw the change in his expression. "They're coming, aren't they?" "Not yet," Ethan said, "but they know where to look." She stood quickly, her face pale. "Then we have to go. Please." He raised a hand, calm but firm. "Running blind gets you caught faster. We move when it's time. Until then, we prepare." Rachel wanted to argue, but she saw something in his eyes that silenced her. Not anger, but certainty. The kind that only came from someone who had seen what waiting could save and what panic could destroy. As he checked the locks on the door, Ethan's mind replayed the night before. The way the man in the snow had spoken about the camera, the way he'd called it insurance. He had heard enough cartel whispers overseas to know that word meant leverage. Whatever was on that device wasn't just evidence, it was power. He turned back toward Rachel. "You said your husband hid it. Did he ever mention where?" She hesitated. "Just once. He said if anything happened, to find the old cabin near the ridge. It used to belong to his father, but that was months ago. It's deep in the forest." Ethan memorized the direction in his mind. North Ridge, maybe 6 or 7 miles. It would be hard terrain, thick with wildlife. He'd seen bear prints near the stream the day before, but that wasn't what bothered him most. It was how organized the attack had been. These weren't random thugs. Someone had given orders. Someone who wanted the camera enough to risk coming into the mountains during a storm. When Rachel went to comfort her daughter, Ethan crouched near Rex. The dog's muscles were still taut, every sense alive. "You feel it too, huh?" Ethan murmured. Rex blinked slowly, his gaze unwavering. In that silence between them, Ethan heard everything he needed: readiness, loyalty, and the faint echo of grief that still bound them both to ghosts they couldn't bury. By late afternoon, the wind had shifted again, bringing the brittle smell of pine resin and distant smoke. Rachel busied herself with a small act of normalcy, boiling snow for tea, folding blankets, as if fragile routines could protect them. Emma sat beside Rex, whispering to him as though he could answer. Maybe he did, in his own way. Ethan stepped outside, scanning the ridgeline through the pale dusk. For a moment, he could almost pretend this place was safe, that the cabin could hold them long enough for the world to forget. But safety was a word he no longer trusted. It was a lullaby people told themselves between disasters. He looked back at the light flickering through the window, a fragile beacon in a land that had devoured better men. When he came back in, Rachel met his gaze. "You're going after it, aren't you?" He didn't deny it. "If I find that camera, maybe we end this before it reaches your doorstep again." She exhaled, torn between gratitude and dread. "Then we'll wait here?" He shook his head. "You'll stay hidden. If I don't come back by dawn, take Emma and head west. There's an old ranger outpost 5 miles that way. Tell them my name." Rachel's lips parted, but no words came. She only nodded. The firelight caught the glint of fear in her eyes, and Ethan realized it mirrored his own. The fear of failing again, of losing another life to a war that wasn't supposed to be his anymore. Night fell quickly, swallowing the last traces of blue from the sky. As Ethan checked his rifle and the map he'd drawn from memory, Rex paced beside him, restless. The dog paused once by the door, nose pressed to the crack, a low sound rising from his throat. Not anger this time, but something like warning. Ethan followed his gaze toward the dark line of the trees. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement, a shadow slipping between the trunks. Then it was gone. He closed the lantern, dousing the cabin in soft darkness. "We move at first light," he whispered. But part of him knew that whatever waited out there wasn't waiting for dawn. Morning came thin and gray over the forest, its light weak against the endless pines. Frost clung to the cabin roof like quiet ash. Ethan woke before dawn, as he always did, and found Rex already standing by the door watching the woods. The dog hadn't slept. He never did, when the world outside felt wrong. The snow held faint prints, blurred by wind, too many hours old to track clearly, but enough to remind Ethan that danger was patient. He strapped his pack, checked his rifle, and whispered to Rachel that he'd return by nightfall. She didn't argue this time, though her hand shook as she poured hot water into a tin cup. "Please," she said, barely audible, "bring it back. Make this end." Ethan gave no answer. He didn't believe in endings, only pauses between storms. Rex followed him out into the cold, the door closing softly behind them. The forest stretched wide and empty, every sound swallowed by snow. The air tasted metallic, heavy with the scent of pine sap and something older, the memory of blood. They moved north toward the ridge Rachel had described, crossing frozen streams and half-buried trails. The land grew steeper, the trees taller, the silence more complete. Ethan walked in rhythm with Rex's breathing, the two of them attuned to every subtle shift. The creak of a branch, the rush of wind that wasn't quite natural. He had walked through too many killing grounds not to feel when one was waiting. By noon, they reached the base of a slope, where an old hunting path cut through a line of rock. At its edge stood the remains of a wooden sign, half buried in snow. The letters were long faded, but one word still showed faintly: Moore, the name of Rachel's late husband's family. Ethan's pulse quickened. He knelt beside it, brushing snow away, then looked up the ridge. The path beyond was narrower, marked by claw prints. Wolves. Not new, not old. Somewhere between. He glanced at Rex, who was already staring into the trees ahead, body rigid. They continued anyway. The climb was slow, the air thin. When the wind shifted, Ethan caught the faint smell of decay. Not death fresh and wet, but something that had lingered too long. His instincts told him they were close. They reached a clearing ringed by thick pines. In the center stood an old cabin, smaller than Rachel's, half collapsed, roof caved in under the weight of snow. But it was real. It was the place. Ethan approached cautiously, hand near his weapon. Rex moved ahead, sniffing at the steps, tail low but steady. Inside, the air was cold and stale. The floorboards creaked with each step, and sunlight streamed through a hole in the roof, turning the dust to gold. Ethan scanned the room. A rusted stove, a broken table, and on the far wall a set of shelves nearly hidden beneath a fallen beam. Something glinted behind it. He crossed the room, pushed the debris aside, and found a metal box wedged between the boards. It was small, the size of a lunch tin, with the faint engraving of a camera brand, long discontinued. His breath caught. He pried it open carefully. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, was a camera, old, scratched, but intact. Alongside it was a flash drive taped to the bottom. For a moment, relief flickered, but it vanished as quickly as it came. From outside came the sound of snow shifting, a soft crunch, then another. Rex's growl filled the air, low and deep. Ethan moved to the window, eyes narrowing. Between the trees, shadows moved, not men this time, but wolves, at least 4, maybe 5, circling the clearing. Their eyes caught the weak light, glowing amber and silent. "Easy," Ethan murmured, hand tightening on his rifle. He didn't want to shoot. The noise would draw attention, and the last thing he needed was cartel scouts hearing the echo. Rex stepped forward, growl turning sharper. One of the wolves broke the circle, moving closer, testing them. Another followed. The pack was hungry, bold. When the first lunged, everything became motion. Rex leapt to intercept, colliding mid-air with the beast. Snow exploded around them, snarls echoing. Ethan fired once, a controlled shot that dropped another wolf charging from the side. But there were too many. Rex bit, twisted, slammed one to the ground, but a second clamped onto his flank. Ethan turned, firing again, his heartbeat pounding like a drum. The wolves scattered, regrouped, then vanished into the trees as fast as they'd come, leaving only blood in the snow and the sound of Rex's ragged breathing. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him. The wound wasn't fatal, but deep, a slice along the ribs. Rex trembled but didn't whine. His eyes met Ethan's, fierce and defiant, as if to say he was still standing. Ethan tore open his pack, pulling out gauze and a strip of dried herbs he'd taken from a field medic's kit years ago, a blend he'd used on himself once in Afghanistan when no one else was left to patch him. "Hold still," he muttered. Rex obeyed. He worked fast, cleaning the wound with melted snow, pressing the herbs against it before wrapping it tight with cloth. Blood seeped through, but slower now. Ethan brushed the dog's head once, the closest thing to comfort he could offer. "You'll live," he said quietly. "You've lived through worse." When the adrenaline finally ebbed, he looked back toward the camera resting inside the open box. He picked it up, studying it in the fading light. The thing felt heavier than metal, like it carried every death connected to it. He powered it on. To his surprise, it still flickered to life. The first image that appeared on the tiny, cracked screen was of Rachel's husband, smiling beside a container ship. The next, a stack of crates marked with a company logo Ethan recognized. He'd seen that symbol overseas, painted on boxes of weapons meant for allies but often ending up in enemy hands. The connection hit him hard. This wasn't just cartel corruption, it was international. He pocketed the flash drive, knowing it was the real prize. As he packed up, Rex pushed to his feet, staggering slightly but unwilling to stay down. Ethan smiled faintly. "You're stubborn," he said. Rex's only answer was a slow blink. They left the cabin at dusk, the air colder, the wind sharper. Ethan moved quickly, following their own tracks back down the ridge. But when they reached the frozen stream below, he stopped. The snow around their path was disturbed, new prints overlaying old ones. Human this time, several pairs, boots. The lines were deep, recent, and heading in one direction, toward the cabin they'd just left. Ethan's pulse steadied to that familiar rhythm again. Someone had been following since morning, waiting for him to find what they couldn't. He looked at Rex. The dog's ears were flat, eyes locked on the dark woods behind them. "Come on," Ethan whispered. "We're not alone anymore." They moved through the gathering dark, the weight of the camera pressing against his side, the snow whispering beneath their boots. Somewhere far off, a single wolf howled, not in hunger this time, but warning. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure who it was meant for. The snow had begun to fall again, thin flakes drifting through the pines like ash from some forgotten fire. Dusk clung to the forest, turning everything into shades of gray. Ethan and Rex followed their old trail back toward the cabin, moving carefully, senses sharpened by the memory of those fresh footprints. Every step felt heavier, the air colder, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. By the time they reached the clearing, the last light had drained from the sky. The cabin stood ahead, familiar yet wrong. The door hung half open, snow blowing in through the crack. No smoke from the chimney, no movement. Just the kind of stillness that meant something terrible had already happened. Ethan froze at the edge of the clearing. Rex stopped beside him, his body tense, nose twitching. There was blood in the air, faint, but there. Ethan moved forward slowly, rifle raised. The snow outside the door was disturbed. Boot prints, too many to count, leading both in and out. Inside, the fire had gone out, leaving behind the bitter smell of wet ash. Furniture lay overturned, a chair shattered against the wall, blankets strewn across the floor. A pot still sat on the stove, cold and blackened. And then he saw it, the note, nailed to the wooden table with a hunting knife. The handwriting was rough and deliberate, the message short. "We have them, the woman and the child. Bring the camera to the bridge by the river before sunrise. Come alone." The words hit like a hammer. Rachel and Emma gone. Ethan's mind went cold, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with weather. He pulled the knife free, folding the note into his pocket, and turned toward Rex. The dog stood at the doorway, eyes fixed on the empty chairs, as if waiting for the sound of the girl's voice that no longer came. Ethan crouched beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get them back," he said softly. "I promise." He started to search the cabin for anything that might help, a sign of how many had come, what direction they'd taken. Near the window, he found broken glass on the floor, small flecks of blood on the sill. One of them had been injured. He looked outside and saw faint drag marks heading toward the southern trail leading into the valley. They'd taken the main path toward the river. As he traced the evidence, something shifted in the snow outside. A faint crunch, one set of footsteps, not many. Someone was still out there. Ethan signaled Rex with a quick gesture. The dog slipped out the back door, silent as breath. Ethan moved toward the front, weapon ready. When the figure appeared from behind a tree line, Ethan almost fired before the man raised his hands. "I wouldn't," the stranger said, voice calm but strained. "You'll waste the bullet." He stepped into view, a man in his 40s, dressed like a forest ranger, though the badge on his coat looked worn and unpolished. His name tag, faded but legible, read Collins. He looked like someone who had seen too much and said too little. "You must be Walker," Collins continued. "Rachel told me about you." Ethan didn't lower the rifle. "Where are they?" "They took them an hour ago," Collins said, breath forming pale clouds. "Headed east, down toward the old steel bridge. I was on patrol when I saw the trucks pass. 3 men, maybe 4. Black SUV, tinted windows. You're lucky they didn't see me." Rex appeared from the side, growling low, circling the newcomer. Collins didn't flinch. "Easy, boy," he said quietly. "You've got good instincts." Ethan finally lowered his weapon, though his tone stayed sharp. "You know the area?" "Every inch of it. Been patrolling these mountains since before you were in uniform," Collins said. "If they're heading for the river, They'll use the logging road to cut time. You won't get there on foot before sunrise. Then I'll find another way." Collins studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There's a snowmobile at the ranger post 2 miles from here. Take it. But if you're going to face those men alone—" He hesitated. "You should know what you're walking into. The one giving orders, the man they call Silas, isn't some hired gun. He used to run logistics for a security firm that trained half the cartels south of the border. Ruthless, but precise. If he's here himself, it means the stakes just got higher." The name hit a memory. Ethan had heard it whispered once during a classified mission in Mexico. A man who sold tactics like merchandise, who believed fear was the most efficient weapon. "Silas," Ethan repeated. "Then this ends tonight." Collins handed him a folded map from his jacket pocket. "You'll need this. Follow the ridge to the east, cut through the frozen creek bed. It'll bring you down right behind the bridge. They won't expect that route." Ethan took the map, nodding once. "Why help me?" The ranger's gaze drifted to the broken cabin. "Because years ago, I didn't help someone else when I should have, a missing hiker. I waited for backup that never came. Found him 2 days later, frozen not a mile from where I was standing. I told myself it wasn't my fault. Been trying to make that right ever since." That was all the explanation Ethan needed. He checked his gear and turned toward the door. "Lock this place down. If I don't come back, burn everything." Collins gave a grim smile. "You sound like you've said that before." Ethan didn't reply. Outside, the wind was rising again, sweeping snow across the ground. Rex trotted at his side, the bandage on his ribs still fresh but holding. The dog's eyes glimmered in the dim light, fierce and determined. Pain hadn't dulled him. It had sharpened him. They reached the edge of the trees as night deepened fully. The mountains loomed like black shapes against a bruised sky. Ethan paused, glancing back at the faint glow of the cabin behind them. The warmth that had once lived there was gone, replaced by a silence so deep it felt like morning. He looked down at Rex. "You ready?" Rex gave a quiet huff, almost like an answer. Together they moved east, disappearing into the dark. Hours later, the forest opened to reveal the frozen river winding like a vein of glass beneath the moonlight. In the distance, the old steel bridge rose above it, a skeleton of rust and shadow. 2 vehicles sat parked at its far end. Faint shapes moved around them, the dull glint of rifles catching the light. Ethan crouched behind a fallen log, heart steady. He could see them clearly now. 4 men, one of them pacing near the bridge's center, and between the vehicles, 2 smaller figures bound together, heads bowed against the cold. Rachel and Emma. He exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to Rex's shoulder. "We do this quiet," he whispered. But before he could move, a new sound sliced through the wind, a sharp crack, distant but distinct. Not gunfire, a signal flare. It rose red into the sky from somewhere beyond the bridge, hissing against the snow. Rex growled softly, ears flattening. Ethan looked up at the flare's fading trail and felt something twist in his gut. That wasn't part of their plan, because it wasn't his signal. Someone else was coming. The river below the bridge was a mirror of steel, frozen and silent. Snow drifted across the beams like slow-moving smoke. The red flare still glowed faintly in the sky, its color staining the world in warning. Ethan crouched in the tree line, Rex pressed close to his side, both watching the figures on the bridge. Rachel and Emma were tied near the center, surrounded by 4 armed men. One of them stood apart, tall, composed, his movements too controlled to belong to a hired thug. That had to be Silas. Even from a distance, Ethan could sense the discipline in the man's posture, the stillness of someone who had spent years teaching others how to kill efficiently. He was ex-military, or worse, someone who'd forgotten what that used to mean. Ethan studied the setup. The SUVs were positioned to block the bridge on both sides, a generator humming softly beside one, its faint light casting yellow arcs on the snow. Silas spoke to a man with a headset pointing toward the forest. They were expecting company, maybe even him. That flare wasn't an accident. It was bait. He turned to Rex, whispering, "They're ready for us." Rex gave a low rumble of agreement. Not fear, but recognition. They'd seen this kind of trap before. Ethan's fingers brushed the flash drive in his pocket. The camera and its data were locked in a waterproof case buried half a mile back. Silas wanted it, but Ethan wouldn't deliver it until the hostages were safe. As he surveyed the ground, a voice cut through the stillness, calm, amplified by a speaker. "Sergeant Walker." It was Silas. "I know you're out there. I know how you think. You don't abandon civilians, especially not women and children, so come out, and let's end this without a massacre." Ethan's breath fogged the air. He hadn't used that rank in years. He whispered, "They know me." Rex shifted, eyes narrowing. Somewhere beyond the bridge another light flickered, not from the cartel men, but from the ridge behind them. Ethan froze. A silhouette appeared there, moving fast, rifle in hand. Collins. The ranger had followed. He crouched among the rocks, scanning the field through binoculars. Ethan cursed under his breath. Collins didn't understand what kind of crossfire he was walking into. Silas turned sharply, noticing movement near the ridge. "We're not alone," he barked to his men. "Check the perimeter." 2 of the gunmen began moving up the slope, rifles raised. Ethan had to move now. He gestured to Rex and slipped from cover, circling wide along the frozen edge of the river. His boots sank into the crusted snow, every sound magnified in his head. The air was thin, his breath steady, the rhythm of old operations returning. Rex stayed just behind him, quiet as a ghost. They reached the underside of the bridge where ice hung from the beams like blades. Above them, Silas paced near Rachel and Emma. "Your husband died protecting something meaningless," he said, his voice sharp but almost conversational. "Data, evidence, truth. People think it changes the world. It doesn't. The world belongs to those willing to take it." Rachel didn't reply. Her hands were tied, but her gaze was steady. Even Emma, trembling beside her, looked more defiant than afraid. Ethan climbed one of the support beams, moving upward hand by hand until he reached the platform just beneath the bridge's surface. He could see their boots now, hear Silas's breath between words. Rex stayed below, watching, waiting. Ethan counted the steps of the 2 guards patrolling the far end, waiting for their rhythm to sync. When it did, he moved. He rolled out from under the beam, rising in one fluid motion. The first man never had a chance. Ethan's elbow struck his jaw, followed by a silent sweep that sent him sprawling. The second reached for his weapon, but Rex was already there, launching from below with a snarl that echoed through the night. The man went down hard, rifle skittering across the snow. "Contact!" someone shouted. Gunfire erupted. Silas spun, pulling Rachel toward him, his pistol pressed against her shoulder. "Stop!" he shouted, "or she dies." Ethan froze behind a pillar, gun drawn, mind burning with calculation. One wrong move, and it would all end. He called out, "Silas, you kill her, and everything you came for dies with her. The data's gone. I buried it. You'll never find it." Silas hesitated. "You're bluffing. Try me." The standoff stretched like glass about to crack. Wind howled through the bridge, pushing snow across their feet. Silas shifted his grip, just slightly, but enough. That was all Ethan needed. He fired once. The bullet tore through Silas's wrist, sending the gun spinning into the snow. Rachel fell to the ground, dragging Emma with her. Rex charged forward, intercepting a third gunman aiming at Ethan. The dog hit hard, forcing the weapon aside, even as a shot rang out. Rex stumbled, but didn't stop. Ethan moved fast, firing twice more, dropping the last of Silas's men. The ex-mercenary himself crawled toward the edge, clutching his bleeding arm. Ethan advanced slowly, rifle steady. Silas looked up, a bitter grin cutting through the pain. "You think you won?" "I don't think," Ethan said coldly. "I make sure." He kicked the pistol aside and pulled Rachel and Emma to their feet. Rachel's hand shook as she clutched her daughter. "He's still alive," she whispered. "Not for long if he tries again." Ethan turned to call Rex and saw him collapse near the bridge rail. He was there in seconds, dropping to his knees beside the dog. Blood darkened the snow beneath Rex's shoulder. His eyes were half open, still alert, still trying to rise. Ethan pressed his hand to the wound, whispering, "Stay with me. We're not done yet." Rex's breathing came shallow, but his gaze stayed locked on Ethan's face. Steady, unflinching, loyal until the end. Then, faintly, he shifted his head, eyes flicking toward the river below. Ethan followed the motion and saw Silas crawling again, reaching for the fallen pistol. Without hesitation, Ethan stood and fired one final shot. Silas fell backward, his body tumbling into the frozen river below, swallowed by darkness. The echo faded, leaving only the wind and the soft sound of Rachel's sobbing. When dawn broke, the world turned silver. The bridge was quiet again. Collins arrived an hour later, limping from the ridge, his face pale but alive. He knelt beside Rex, silent for a long moment. "Hell of a dog," he murmured. Ethan nodded, voice low. "He saved them." They buried Rex beneath a pine near the riverbank, marking the spot with his collar and a stone from the bridge. The snow began to fall again, soft, relentless, indifferent. Rachel stood beside Ethan, Emma clutching her hand. "What will you do now?" she asked. Ethan looked toward the mountains, where the storm clouds were breaking into light. "There's still work to do," he said. "People need to see what's on that drive. He died for it. Rex did too. I'm not letting it fade into another secret." Rachel nodded, tears freezing on her lashes. "Then we'll finish it together." For the first time in a long time, Ethan almost smiled. The war wasn't over, but somewhere in the hollow quiet of that dawn, he felt something shift. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. Far across the valley, the sound of a single engine echoed through the morning. Another vehicle on the move, unseen through the snow. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Somewhere, someone had survived. The story wasn't finished. Sometimes miracles don't roar with thunder or blaze across the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through the courage of a soldier who refuses to surrender, the loyalty of a wounded dog who keeps fighting, or the faith of a mother who still believes light can return after darkness. What happened on that frozen bridge wasn't just a battle. It was a reminder that God still works through ordinary people, through hands scarred by struggle and hearts strong enough to love again. When Ethan buried Rex beneath the pine, the snow began to fall like grace, soft, endless, cleansing the traces of fear. It was as if heaven whispered, "I never left you." In our own lives, we all walk across bridges like that, fragile, uncertain, suspended between what we've lost and what we still hope for. And maybe, just maybe, God sends us protectors when we least expect them, a friend, a stranger, or even a loyal animal, to remind us that goodness still stands guard in this world. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe again. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from or who your protector has been in life. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories of courage, compassion, and faith. May God bless you, watch over your family, and place a guardian, human or angelic, on your path when you need one most. Amen.